Let me congratulate the EJC on 20 years of successful training and to celebrate. I'm happy to be here to celebrate its 20th anniversary. I'm really honored to have a chance to do the keynote speech this afternoon. 2 years ago at the journalism session at the Amsterdam Picnic Conference, I was given the duty of making a presentation called The Future of Journalism. My session was at the end. It was a pretty lofty title for a session at the end, and because I stood in the way of the participants getting to the bar, I felt I had a challenge. I'm thankful that I don't have that challenge this morning, this afternoon. Instead, I am challenged to share my thoughts around the idea of the future of journalism education. And I recognize that the future of journalism education means different things to different people. So I will be using it in the most broadest sense of the word. Obviously, I believe that there is a future, and I believe that it is also going to be a difficult and challenging future. It's going to be a future full of innovation and what I call disruptive innovation and disruptive change. It will be an opportunity and it will be interesting times. I believe we will see an evolution and an uncoupling of the concepts of the value of journalism education and training from the idea of a journalism degree. And to the academic colleagues in the room, that will probably be a very uncomfortable position. This has both opportunities and challenges for journalism training organization and, more important, for the media companies who depend upon having a well-educated, versatile, creative, innovative staff, not only of today, but of tomorrow. I believe our future has to look towards the long term, and this is why now is the time to start thinking about the future of journalism education. Of course, the problem with the future of anything is determining whose future it is. When we think about the future, clearly there is not a single future. That my future is going to be very different from the young woman sitting in the front row tweeting away on TweetDeck. So we need to make sure that when we talk about the future that we bring our own individual lenses, our own perspective to understanding what's happening in the world and recognize that there is no single future. When thinking about the future of journalism education, remember that is also linked to the future of journalism itself. Let me frame the issue this way. The news business model, the media business model, is still, unfortunately, mostly broken. Journalism is still undervalued or not valued at all. Journalists are still being displaced, or they have the wrong skills to succeed in the future. So where does this leave us? It is my belief, as I said 2 years ago, that we are de-evolving, uncoupling the journalism ecosystem between the economic model of journalism and the act of journalism itself. As we watch this painful uncoupling, we need to ask ourselves some fundamental questions. What will be the values that will remain at the end of the day when this turmoil is over? And what values of journalism matter to you, to your audience, to your community, to the world itself? At the end of my 2010 presentation, I talked about how I saw the future of journalism was directly tied to the future of journalism education and, by extension, journalism training. More than ever, I believe that the future of journalism and the future of journalism education are bound together. Unfortunately, each is caught within its own vortex of change in today's very challenging world. The disruption in the economic models of news organization rippling out from the United States to Europe and elsewhere is well documented. The media industry missed its inflection point 20 years ago. Media companies have been disrupted by innovation created by others, by new organization, and by technology companies. The media industry did not respond well when these disruptive technologies started to take away the economic foundation upon which journalism depended. The industry as a whole did not create innovations to serve its audiences and non-customers. The industry missed the opportunity to make changes that would allow them to adapt to the changing world. And I think we all can look around and see what the result has been. It's important to note that news is not less important than it's been in the past. It's not that news is being consumed less. In fact, news consumption driven by new technologies, such as smartphones and the tablet, is actually increasing according to the Pew Research Centers. However, the technology companies, the Big Five, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, AOL, Microsoft, capture 68% of all U.S. digital ad sales. By 2015, Facebook is predicted to capture 1 out of 5 online ads sold in the U.S. You probably know this, or you know most of it. I think that journalism education is at its own inflection point, its own critical moment. No matter if you're an educator, a school administrator, run a training center, or is just interested in journalism, this is a critical time for journalism education, just as it was a critical time 20 years ago for the media industry. And everybody has a stake in the quality of journalism education and training, just as everyone has a stake in quality journalism. Without a robust future for journalism education, it is hard to see a robust future for journalism. And that's bad for democracy, and it's bad for the citizens who depend on fair and accurate information. We have learned that media companies cannot cut their way out of the disruption of their economic models. Journalism education cannot teach its way to the future. Just as media companies need to innovate, so must journalism educators and journalism trainers. We need to innovate inside the classroom and inside the seminar room with new forms of teaching. We need to innovate to make journalism education easier to get around the world. And frankly, it's unfair to pick on journalism education. The turmoil that is underway will affect all educational institutions, and that includes nonprofit schools, universities, for-profit training institutes. It's going to affect everyone. It is widespread. It is happening at the grade school level, at the secondary school level, at the high school level, at colleges, at universities, and with professional training. Education is being disrupted by the same technology innovation that turned the media business upside down and inside out. I greatly recognize that the academy has multiple purposes. There's research and scholarship. There's socialization to help students understand their place in the world. And then there's formal education and training. It is this formal education, the student education and training, where I see the potential for the greatest disruptions. This is a challenge that should matter to everybody in this room, teachers of journalism, those who work and lead journalism-based training centers, and those who work in the media. Let me talk a little bit about disruption and disruptive innovation. I'm sure that many of you have read or are aware of the work of Clayton Christensen on how companies respond to change and innovation. I first read his book, The Innovators Dilemma, when I was president of Central Newspapers in Phoenix, Arizona. I was responsible for bringing new technologies into the company, from pagination to online services. There was one aspect of Christensen's book that has stuck with me for the more than 20 years, or 15 years then I first read it. I seized upon Christensen's work as I tried to make the case why the company needed to aggressively make radical changes. Radical changes. Christensen forces us to think about what is your business and who are your customers. And more important, who are our non-customers? It helped me push the idea that we weren't in the newspaper business, but rather in the news and information business. Now, this doesn't sound too radical today, but 20 years ago, that was pretty wild thinking. I loved his story in the book about the disk drive makers and how the companies who created devices for mainframe and microcomputers, the big machines, what business they thought they were in. One of these companies, Winchester, had a very successful business. It made disk drives. They were in the disk drive business, or so they thought. When the personal computer came along and it needed disk drives, or rather storage space, Winchester looked at the PC and those PC companies and didn't see them as customers. It didn't see the need to serve them as non-customers. Rather, they were too busy listening to their existing customers, such as Digital Equipment Corporation or the Control Data. They didn't see that they were in the storage space. Apple and the other PC makers had a storage problem, but the disk drive companies weren't able to see how disruptive the personal computer was going to be to their existing business, and they didn't listen to the non-customers. If they had seen that they were in the storage business, companies like Winchester might be still in business today. This disruption by innovators and other forces is this kind of disruption by innovators and other forces is what the education business faces today. One possible future from all of this disruption is the unbundling of a journalism education from a journalism degree. If you think about the unbundling of news and information from traditional mass media delivery methods, such as a newspaper or a television broadcast, this is what I'm talking about. In the past, the economic value of these delivery methods provided a distribution of a scarce product, the news. And for a long time, it was a terrific business. In much the same way there was an economic model based on scarcity of getting the news, there is a society and economic model based on the scarcity of getting education and a degree. A college degree, because it was offered to a limited number of individuals, provides a means of differentiating the applicants in the hiring process. And while there's an assumption that a journalism degree meant a quality journalism education, there was no guarantee. There was a scarcity. Not every school had a journalism program, and fewer schools had accredited programs. These programs are based on a delivery method rooted in custodial education, which means that they're teacher-focused. If you're a teacher-focused institution, you are less likely to disrupt your core audience, which are the teachers or the faculty. This is also true for journalism training organizations that are forced to limit the amount of training based on cost or seats in a seminar room. However, technology, mostly the internet, it's changing how we learn. And this is part of the disruptive technology or the disruptive innovation that we face today. Technology is providing new forms of teaching and new ways of delivering an effective educational experience. Technology will create student-focused culture in much the same way technology has created a customer-centric experience in the media business. In much the same way news became available whenever a reader, a viewer, or user wanted it via online and mobile devices, so will education. So will training. Students can go to school or go back to school online without having to go anywhere. Adults can continue learning throughout their entire lives. In recent years, there's been a lot written about the coming disruption in education. Today, those promises of change are starting to whip around universities and colleges and training organizations in the same way they started battering the media industry 20 years ago. The constraints of today's journalism education system, frankly, do not reward innovation. They provide students with less opportunity to get the best education and instead force students to pick courses that are based on the availability of seats in classrooms, not from the best teachers in the world. They provide students with There are also economic challenges facing the academy. Less funding from traditional sources, less public support. There are academic challenges. The world is changing faster than the people who are supposed to teach can learn themselves. And while there's always been a disconnect between the media industry and the academic community, the fault lines, I'm afraid, have widened. To look at this question about the value of a journalism degree, I surveyed more than 1,975 professionals and academics. I thought it was important to see if my assumptions were correct based on research. About 42% of the respondents were from the academy, 34% were from media organizations, about 11% were independent journalists or freelancers working on their own, and the rest were students or those just interested. When asked about how vital a degree is in understanding the value of journalism, 95% of the academics said it was very to extremely important. So academics, 95%, extremely to very important. However, slightly more than half, 56% of the professionals said very to extremely important. That's a big gap. That's a gap of 40 points. That's a perception between the academic and the professionals that has to be addressed. When the question about the value of a degree when it comes to equipping students with the skills or ability in news gathering, editing, and presenting the news, the gap is just as wide. And this has implications for anybody who is hiring students in the future. 96% of the academics said that the degree was essential to those skills or abilities of gathering, editing, and presenting the news. Yet only 59% of the professionals felt the same way. We've known that for a while there's been a difference of opinion about the value of a journalism degree. Today that gap looks more like a canyon. I do not suggest, and I do not think the survey suggests, that there is no value in a college degree or there is no value in a journalism degree. Quite the contrary, I am a degree-holding journalist, and my degree is in journalism. Rather, I think this points out an opportunity to change. I think this is telling us in much the same way the early online opportunities that the media industry had 20 years ago were telling us the world is changing, the world is shifting. It is an opportunity for the academy and other journalism training organizations to change. My friend at the Knight Foundation, Eric Newton, refers to a symphony of slowness to change at journalism schools that hurts both students and society. I agree, and so do our survey respondents. Half of the professionals said that journalism education is not keeping up with industry changes. This isn't shocking, as there has always been a feeling in the professional ranks that the academy sometimes isn't aware of what's going on in the real world. However, a third of the professors, the academic members who responded to the survey, agreed that journalism education isn't keeping up. A third agreed that they're not keeping up or their schools are not keeping up. At Poynter, I hear from scores of teachers who are frustrated with the situation, the lack of support to change, of what's being taught, their own lack of skills to equip students for today's media world. Still, it also leaves me wondering, what about the remaining two-thirds of the academy who believe that education is keeping up with the changes in the industry? Frankly, I'm not even sure the industry is keeping up sometimes with changes that are going around. It makes for a very difficult situation for anybody who cares about journalism education and journalism training and better journalism. What will it take for educational institutions to deal with disruptive innovation that is here today and will get more challenging in the future? What this means to me is that we need to look at new ways of teaching, and we need to look at new ways of teaching the values and skills of journalism so that they are relevant to today's media world. Newton, in his recent speech before the Conference of Journalism Educators, suggested 4 radical reforms for journalism and communication education. I think they're worth repeating. He suggested innovate, create new ways of using software and new software itself. Teach open, collaborative methods. No longer must students be lone wolf reporters or cogs in a company wheel. Connect to the whole university. This can mean team teaching a science journalism course with actual scientists. And finally, probably his most controversial recommendation, expand the role of expand journalism and communication schools as community content providers. University hospitals save lives, he says. University law clinics take cases to the U.S. Supreme Court. University news labs can reveal truth that can help us right wrongs. Eric has some interesting ideas, but perhaps we aren't being bold enough. Can we imagine even more innovation and new ways of teaching journalism? What do our customers want? What do our students want? What do the people who attend our seminars want? But more importantly, what do our non-customers want? There's that word again, non-customers. Let me explore a little bit about that concept before I bring us back to the future. 10 years ago, I was appointed the presidential scholar at the Poynter Institute. My daunting task at that time was to look at the intersection of technology, journalism, and training. At that time, despite the shocks caused by 9/11, Poynter was in an enviable position as the country's leading journalism training institute. In 2003, we offered 50 seminars at the institute in St. Petersburg, Florida. About 1,800 participants spent 3 to 5 days studying writing, reporting, visual journalism, leadership, management, and online skills. We served, at best, 1% of the journalism, potential journalists at the time. 1%, that's it. Did that mean the other 99% didn't want training? Well, I think we know that that's not true. I doubt it. It did mean that for many organizations, training was an expense that they didn't want to incur, a very short-sighted view in my mind. For others, it was a matter of finding the time to be away from the office, increasingly difficult today. And then there were the folks who couldn't find any seminars that meet their needs. Even with 50 seminars, there are a lot of topics a training center didn't cover. These folks, this 99%, were our non-customers. And despite its high-quality training, Poynter was at risk of being disrupted by the very technology that was disrupting the industry that it served, the media industry that it served. It was being, or could have been, disrupted by the web. Our non-customers started finding other ways to learn journalism without having to travel to Poynter. Fortunately, thanks in part to a grant from the Knight Foundation, Poynter was able to create its own disruptive engine with its e-learning program, News University. We did not create distance training. We did not replicate the Poynter seminar experience via e-learning. Rather, we created something that was different while upholding the same journalistic standards of Poynter. We looked at what our non-customers wanted and needed. We looked at ways to innovate what we taught. And, as important, we looked at ways on how to innovate the way we teach. While this kind of change is not without its risk, at the end, we are able to reach more non-customers and make them into customers than if we had tried to just duplicate what we did in a seminar room and take it online. This is what journalism education programs need to do, not just at universities, but all journalism education programs. It is an opportunity to challenge, it's an opportunity and challenge for journalism training institutions to reimagine the way they reach their audience, the way they teach their customers, and the way they measure success. We need to encourage more ways of teaching, using all of the potential delivery means possible: the lecture, video, online, self-study, crowdsourcing, guided learning, hybrid learning, blended learning, all different kinds of teaching methods. It is an opportunity to challenge, it's an opportunity and challenge for journalism institutions to reimagine their role to support journalism. One innovative example is a program that is sponsored by the EJC and just concluded. It was taught by Poynter, and it was taught to students in 4 countries: the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland. It was a hybrid program that blended online material with on-site training and mentoring. We saw an 11 to 27% increase in the self-reported abilities from these participants, with more than 90% saying that half to all of the content was useful. That's 90% saying they got half to all of the content value that they could possibly imagine. This form of training works. We recently completed a program called Introduction to Journalism. We taught it via our e-learning platform to 3 U.S. schools. Each of the Poynter faculty members shared his or her expertise in a 16-week program. While most of the program was online, one school, Missouri State University, provided mentoring or FaceTime to the students during the 16-week program. Missouri State also taught the same subjects via traditional classroom method. We tested both groups, the online and the classroom students, before the term began and after the coursework was finished. The e-learning group, with its hybrid approach, learned as well, if not better, than the classroom contingent. This form of education works. But don't take my word for it. A new study by the nonprofit think tank Itasca S&R compared two versions of an introductory statistic course, one taught face-to-face by professors and one taught mostly online. The online module had only 1 hour of face time with a mentor during the course of a week. Researchers found these students fared equally well in both formats in terms of every measure of their learning. The only difference, the online group appeared to learn faster. These new ways of teaching are disrupting the education and training industries. New research about the effectiveness of online teaching is disrupting the view that e-learning is somehow less effective or less engaging than classroom training. This is an inflection point for journalism education and journalism training. The students raised online, the digital natives, as they're sometimes called, get it. More than 1/3 of U.S. college students are currently enrolled in an e-learning course. That number will continue to grow. Less than 2 weeks ago, a new report by the U.S. Department of Education showed that 53% of public school districts in the U.S. allowed high school students to enroll in distance learning courses. During this academic year that just concluded, that meant 1.3 million of them used e-learning, online training, compared to only 300,000 5 years ago. And even students who have not taken a formal online course are using informal e-learning, such as the thousands of the video tutorials on hundreds of subjects that are housed on YouTube. These folks get it. They will come to expect innovative, engaging, and new forms of training as they get older, as they enter the workforce, as they continue to see that they can be lifelong learners. There are even new businesses starting to develop around innovative ways of teaching, such as the US-based Khan Academy, which hosts hundreds of videos on a number of subjects. They are a disruptive force. Today, students and even young adults will come to expect education that is online and innovative. These students will come to expect education and training that is not custodial. It really doesn't stop with schools. It's not just a problem in the academy. We know there's a growing interest in journalism skills. I point to the growth of Poynter's News University, which now has 218,000 registered users in every part of the world. 218,000 people have signed up for courses on journalism. 15% of those are outside North America. Our strongest growth area, our strongest growing audience, is among individuals who want to learn journalism skills for their own benefit or because it will help them get better at their job. But these jobs are not necessarily in the media industry. We have a partnership with the DuPont industry, for example, to help their writers, their internal journalists, tell better stories. The world is full of people who want to write better, who want to tell stories better, who want to share their experiences. These are potential journalists, whether they have a degree or not. These folks are currently non-customers for journalism education institutions, journalism training institutions. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of opportunity for all of us. It's a lot of opportunity for anyone who wants to teach others the craft and values of good journalism. If we teach these individuals, not only will they have better skills, but they will have a better understanding of the importance that journalism has within our society. And that's good for everyone. When it comes to the future of journalism and journalism education, how important is getting a degree in terms of getting a job? Often a question that gets asked. Again, looking at our survey, there is a difference between what the professionals say and what the academics say. 54% of the professors or the academics say that a journalism degree is very to extremely important when it comes to getting hired. 54%. Yet only 38% of the professionals feel the same way. And when you broke that number down to just the managers, it's even smaller, with only 33% saying that getting a degree in journalism is very to extremely important when it comes to getting a job. Maybe the future has other ways of measuring the importance of a journalism education. If we unbundle the degree from the education, if we unbundle how we look at the value of journalism education from a journalism degree, then I know a lot of people, a lot of employers are going to say, well, how will we know whether they have the skills necessary to help my organization? I contend there are other ways to measure skills competency today. First, let's see the work. Not just traditional clips or tapes. Today, any journalism student looking for work who does not have a rich portfolio of stories and other forms of published public journalism, like a blog or a website, isn't trying. And if they aren't trying, why would you want to hire them in the first place? Providing an opportunity for students to create this body of work would be part of the teaching hospital or teaching news lab method in educating and training that Eric Newton suggests. However, I see a big difference between medical education and journalism education. There are differences in approach and the experiences of the faculty. Many medical educators have practical experiences. Many journalism educators do not. If the concept of a teaching hospital is to work for journalism, then we need to upgrade the faculty, and we need to invest in research and development in which is something else that university hospitals do. And I'm talking about practical research, not just academic exploration. My second idea, and frankly, the idea I'm more passionate about, is verifying journalism education or journalism training with a digital badge. These are badges that represent skills and other competencies. The MacArthur Foundation, a supporter of the digital badge movement, says the badge could be a validated indicator of accomplishment, skill, or interest. The University of California at Davis Sustainable Agricultural Program is built on digital badges that measure core competencies rather than standard 3-credit courses. Digital journalism education badges or digital journalism training badges could not only show formal training but capture the informal learning such as workshops attended, awards won, special projects completed. This is about the mastery of skills rather than specific classroom or seminar work. And it goes beyond a portfolio or a clips collection. This is a radical, disruptive, innovative concept. The badge movement is based on the idea that people should have a way of gathering useful, verifiable evidence of everything they have learned, not just that they sat through a class or a seminar. Kevin Carey, an analyst at the education sector, a think tank, wrote about digital badges recently in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Let me quote him. The standard college transcript looks like a sad and archaic thing. Its considerable value is not based on the information it provides, which is paltry. What does a letter grade in a course often described only by a combination of a generic department label and an arbitrary number, such as Econ 302, really mean? Nobody knows, which is why accredited colleges often don't trust that information for the purpose of college transfer, end quote. I believe the digital badge movement needs to be nurtured and promoted. More important and immediate, journalism training organizations should come together and embrace this new way of rewarding participation in quality education and training, regardless of how or where it was received or who was the training organization. I hope that all of the world's journalism training organizations can find a way to help participants share their accomplishment regardless of the trainer. As I said earlier, the future of journalism matters to the future of our democratic society. Without quality journalism, the quality of our society will diminish. Good journalism supports democracy and builds healthy communities. What's at risk today is some of the very fabric that ties journalism together, some of the very fabric that journalism helps create. We need more people schooled in journalism, not fewer. We need more ways to instill the values of good journalism regardless of the platform or medium. It shouldn't matter whether you work for a company or for yourself. Journalism education and training is at an inflection point. We are at the point where we need true educational innovation. Some will do this. Others will be left behind. An example of which is the sad closure and restructuring of the American Press Institute in the U.S., a training organization that greatly predates Poynter by 30 years. It started in the 40s, late 40s. So again, let me restate this. Journalism training and education is at an inflection point. Some will change and some will be left behind. Some institutions will fail. Some schools will close their journalism departments, just as some newspapers will go out of business. It is not time to say we have always done it that way. It is not time to say, well, that's the way we have always trained, and that's what our customers want. It is time to think of the opportunities to serve the non-customers, the people we are not reaching who are hungry for the skills and values of journalism to help them do their jobs better. It is time to innovate. It is time to disrupt everything. We need to seize the future. And with that, I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I hope that I have sparked some ideas for our upcoming panel discussion. Thank you. So, do we have time for questions? Yes, we do? Okay. Questions or challenges? Actually, I'm willing to accept either one. Yes? No? Okay.
You scared everybody.
I guess I have. If I have scared you, I'm deeply sorry. Yes?
My name's Aidan White. I used to be at the International Federation of Journalists. I'm now heading up the Ethical Journalism Network, which is a global program of the Global Editors Network. Look, I think you've sort of been very, very challenging, but I think you've sort of dealt with, one aspect of the journalism education challenge, which is very important innovation, adjusting to the technology and so on. But to what extent are journalism schools themselves trapped by market models, which are forcing them to reach out, to bring in people, charging a lot of money, and making promises that they can't deliver? Well, that is to say, not enough jobs. I mean, the point about it is, I think, I'd like you to expand, if you could, a little bit on the jobs problem, because I spend a lot of time talking to students, a sea of fresh faces, young people, really wishing to make a difference, wanting to go into a profession, and they're told by their teachers to think about the big papers, to think about the big media, to think about fulfilling their aspiration and dream of being a big star. But the reality is, there are no big stars' jobs.
Well, I think you made my point, actually. I mean, I think that if that's what's being taught, that's what needs to be disrupted, because clearly that the big papers, the big stars, are being replaced by the small organizations, by the very lean entrepreneurial companies that are growing up that do journalism but don't necessarily, you think of them as having something on the newsstand, but they are out there, they are serving communities, and they're doing good work. But that's not being taught because that doesn't fit into the current model. So if you're trapped in that economic conundrum that you outlined, then that's a big problem, because while you're not only are you missing an opportunity to help those customers or those students understand the real world around them, you're missing an opportunity to train people who might never want to work for a big organization.
But that begs the other question about where do you get the money from to fund this form of education?
Well, do you have to have money to fund a total reimagination of what journalism education is? I mean, granted, I'm being somewhat provocative in to say to disrupt it all, but that is the kind of thinking that the media industry needed to do 20 years ago, and say, well, we are going to blow ourselves up so that others can't blow us up, so that we are going to reimagine ourselves. If you look at the open source movement at The Guardian, that took way too long to happen, and yet it's still looked at as being something extremely innovative. So, I mean, it is the challenge for education and trainers to say, okay, this is what we've always done, but let's look at the world. Let's strategically go and say, what do we really want to do? What is our mission? Who do we want to serve? And how are we going to accomplish that mission without saying this is how we've done it in the past? It's starting from zero is a very uncomfortable position.
Okay, just one last, if I can, one last point, which is I want to go back to the funding question, because you've actually sort of highlighted the possibility of the corporate sector playing more of a positive role, perhaps, in helping to fund certain areas of training and education. One of the issues here is that I think we need to ask is, do we need more, and in Europe it's particularly a question, do we need more public funding of public interest journalism that takes account of the sort of modern conditions, which actually is a very important area, because I think the public sector and the public funding of media education is absolutely critical, it seems to me, to that development of the future. So how can you get a sort of a media landscape which is truly going to be modernized and inclusive with all of the groups that you've talked about without extra public funding for education?
Now you've left me with the tough question and without a specific answer, because I mean, but if we don't start talking about the need for it, it's very difficult to see how it will ever happen. So, yes, I agree. There has to be more public funding. But on the other hand, we have to make the case for the value of journalism. The value of journalism going beyond just the economic value of journalism, but the value of journalism as it reflects as a fabric that ties, as a thread that helps tie the fabric of society together. So it's certainly, it's a much more daunting brief than I was given for the future of journalism education. So,
powerful question. You drew attention to the category of present non-users, in this case of journalism education. You gave a couple of examples like the DuPont organization. But could you be a bit more precise on who actually presently are the non-users of journalism education? Which category? Can you label that a bit more precisely?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who are doing what some people would not describe as journalism, but using journalism skills to do their work. And I think there's a large community of people who write and edit either within companies or within corporations who could greatly benefit by understanding how to tell accurate, verifiable, balanced, I'm trying to avoid the use of the word, fairness, but balanced reporting and storytelling. And, when you tell good stories, that's so very important. If we could start there of just helping people tell better stories within companies. But more to the point of an even larger audience, there's a number of people who like to write and share that are hungry for the skills that we all have and could provide. So why not say, this is not a club, this is not an exclusive society, why don't we try to bring more people into this tent, a larger tent, a bigger arena? And maybe they're not professionals as we think of them, but that's why I've never liked the term citizen journalist, because I am a citizen, but I'm also a journalist. So maybe either we should all be citizen journalists, or we should all just be journalists, or doing journalism. And that's you can do journalism without necessarily having a full-time journalism degree, or a full-time job, or a journalism degree. I think there was a question back there.
I'm Faxon Banda from UNESCO in Paris. Before UNESCO, I was a journalism educator. I'm wondering, the disruption that you've described, to what extent does it resonate in developing countries, in emerging markets, say India, where the management and practice of journalism appears to be patterned after the old models of sustainability?
Right.
So is that Euro-American analysis, or it can be replicated elsewhere?
Well, I think that's a great question about the replication elsewhere, because I sort of view this as a tsunami or a wave that is rippling, perhaps starting in the U.S. Because of our slightly longer tradition of formal journalism education. I think actually the developing world's educational institutes have actually more opportunities because they are less rooted in a long-term tradition. I think that it'll be, on the other hand, a more difficult job of convincing them that they need to look at other forms of training. But once there, they will have actually more benefits because they have a larger population to serve with smaller base of institutions to serve them. So I think the potential in the developing world for innovative ways of training journalism or doing journalism education is actually great, and not to get, I would hope that they don't get trapped in frankly, the US-centric model of that we currently have. Now's the time to change, taking the best from the old and creating something from the new that is unique. So, yes?
I have a question. Talking about the business models and funding models you were talking about before in the question, would crowdfunding be an option? Because I think it would be really, talking about public funding doesn't make much sense anymore these days. So crowdfunding would be something new and disruptive that goes in the direction you were talking about.
Yes. I wish I could see that there's a great opportunity for crowdfunding of journalism education. There isn't. But I do believe there's an opportunity for crowdfunding or small group funding or innovative funding for many of the entrepreneurial journalism startups that we see. In fact, at Poynter, we just had an entrepreneurial revenue camp, and the number of innovative ways, some crowdfunding, some funding by events, was remarkable by by the participants there who are finding ways of doing journalism and funding it in ways that are not traditionally based. They're not the traditional advertising model.
I'm Marianne Peters. I don't belong to anything.
That's a position I envy.
It will come to us all. I'd like to ask a few questions about what you said, that journalism is undervalued. I would like to know, I think so too, at least in my own country, Holland. I would like to know if there's more than an opinion. Is there some substantial stuff to deal with this?
There is, and I won't try to remember the number off the top of my head, but if you look at some of the research on credibility and where the public puts journalism credibility in relationship to other public institutions, you see that number has fallen over the last 20 years significantly, and I think that's an indication of the undervaluing of journalism. And if you also look at the almost hate speech that you see about various organizations when they publish something controversial, it's not about the specifics of what is being published, but it is about the lashing out at the institution for doing the work. It clearly indicates to me that there is a lack of understanding of what the role of journalism is in society. So, but the credibility measurement, the public opinion's work on credibility is where I base that undervalued or unvalued statement.
Well, I have two things to say about that. First, the credibility of teachers is going down as well, which in general for a group of journalism teachers is not good, right? But who can do something about it, and what? Can journalism teachers do something about the whole issue of a part of teaching their own students the value of journalism to go beyond their schools?
If I could wave a magic wand and say, well, this is where I think we need to start, I would say that one of the first areas would be the development of media or news literacy programs at every school required of every student, period. Not required of journalism students, but required of every student, so that we get the students aware of the history of a free press. We get them to understand the difference between fact and opinion, about the difference between news and a column. We get them to understand what speech is and why it matters what you say, and how hateful it can be if you don't choose your words carefully. So a news literacy program to me would be the start of a long process of raising the awareness and the value of journalism. And Pointer is involved in a number of them. We're going to be announcing a new program later this summer about increasing our news literacy efforts. The university, I'm trying to think of Stony Brook, has a significant news literacy effort as well. And so, but this is an issue that needs to be addressed worldwide, and there needs to be worldwide effort on this. Are we doing? We're good? Well, thank you again for not only your questions, but your attention, and frankly, thank you for challenging my assumptions, and appreciate it greatly.